Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the ranking of every movie I watched in 2020. Today I will be unveiling movies 80 to 71. Let's get started. With number 80 is Only the Brave. This movie is the true story of the Granite Mountain Hotshots firefighting squad, which was a volunteer squad that was intended to help fight fires in Arizona and California. And this story is just so heartbreaking. What ends up happening is, as there's 19 of 20 members of the firefighting squad ended up perishing due to the Yarnell Hill fire in 2013. And it's really a tragic story that is eloquently and respectfully done on the big screen. And specifically, the performances that stand out to me are Josh Brolin, Jennifer Connelly, and even Miles Teller, all put in great performances. It's just truly a heartbreaking story, and of which the director, Joseph Kosinski, is slated to direct Top Gun Maverick this year, and this is a very good movie based on my opinion, and I'm very excited for that movie as a result. Next, we have Booksmart. Now, Booksmart came out in 2019, and it just so happens to be the directorial debut by Olivia Wilde. She's a famed actress in Hollywood, but not so much in the comedic genre. And this movie is a interesting take on that. And it can be said, oh, it's just a female version of Superbad. But I think this movie is actually while it might be similar, it is obviously takes the experiences of these girls and works with them, and as they're trying to find their purpose after high school. While these two friends were really close in high school, they eventually realize that they're going to have to go their separate ways, and it's just the reality of growing up. And there are a lot of funny moments in this movie, and compared to Superbad, I think they actually add a dramatic element into this movie, which is interesting. I think that is important, and knowing this from experience that of someone who didn't I didn't really get to go out often in high school, and I kind of regret that. And while it's obviously important to put your studies first, at the end of the day, everyone deserves a little bit of fun here and there, and that's what this movie explores the right to. You got to fight for the right to party, as the Beastie Boys said. Next, we have a movie to come out from last year, The Gentleman. Now, coming off his last theatrical release in Aladdin, which was a decent hit, but was pretty disappointing, Guy Ritchie returned to his roots of Lock, Stock, and Barrel with The Gentleman. What I like about it is how meta it is, and how it has this interesting story, but underneath it is the fact that Hugh Grant's character is basically making the whole thing up. So it's basically a movie within a movie, which is very interesting, and you don't often see that with films these days. And the story is a businessman, played by Matthew McConaughey, who is trying to get into the marijuana industry, and he experiences troubling intentions with getting his product out. With there being Colin Farrell's gang is trying to sabotage him, and that's the story that Hugh Grant's character has given to this Hollywood producer. And that's what's interesting is that obviously there's some parts of the movie that are exaggerated, but you expect that because that's what Hollywood movies tend to do sometimes, and that's interesting to see that reflected in this movie. Furthermore, I think a lot of the acting is very good in this movie. Like I said, McConaughey, Hugh Grant, Charlie Hunnam, I mean, it was overall a enjoyable watch, but it went down on my list because it was kind of forgettable in some points. So, but overall, a decent movie. Number 77 is Hobbs and Shaw. Now, where do I start with this movie? This movie is, if The Gentleman was trying to be a serious drama, and even though it wasn't really even, this movie is not even in the same ballpark. There is, there's so much action in this movie, and there's not a lot of time to think about the realism or any logistics in this movie. You just go into it, you just put all your sense of belief behind it and invest all your time into this movie. It's what I really like with this movie is the chemistry between the Dwayne The Rock Johnson and Jason Statham. And obviously, I haven't watched any of the Fast and Furious movies with those two, but they have very good chemistry together. And furthermore, Idris Elba is the antagonist. He is so good at these kind of roles, and he's no different in this movie. And I was pleasantly surprised by Vanessa Kirby as well, and she's a rising star in Hollywood, especially with this movie. Overall, a great popcorn munching film that won't leave you enlightened, but it will definitely leave you satisfied having watched this for 2 hours. Next on my list, I have Extraction. Now, another movie like Hobbs and Shaw, it's solely action based. This movie is about a soldier played by Chris Hemsworth who's tasked with protecting this kid in India, and while also fighting off this gang that's trying to retrieve this kid as he's an important alias on their gang. I think he was the son of the leader. And like with Hobbs and Shaw, this movie does not require you to think at all. It's just solely action, and that's all it does. But it actually does a decent job in having a compelling story with Hemsworth's character and the kid, and I like it in that sense. And not to mention although the ending was disappointing because it was kind of sequel baiting because they didn't show that he died, but they were hinting at it, and that's kind of frustrating that they have to do that because I think it's overall a decent movie on its own. I think what the one thing that stood out to me in the movie is the fact that they even prided themselves on this. They had one scene where they continuous shot for almost 10 minutes, and that was very impressive. Definitely got my attention. And as for Netflix movies go, this is a above average movie that I was pleasantly surprised. Next, for number 75, is Hoosiers, a movie about a small town Indiana high school basketball team that is in in turmoil, but through actions by their coach, played by Gene Hackman, eventually turn it around and win the Indiana State championship. Now, this is also based on a true story, and it's it's your cliche sports story. They were very good, but eventually you have the one coach that is really determined to toughen them up, and that's basically what this movie is. I think this movie is actually very good in that sense, and he has some motivations. And I think that the performance by Dennis Hopper, the former basketball star, high school basketball star, who's been struggling with alcoholism, is really in his redemption to be an assistant coach is really endearing to say the least. And to see them win at the end is satisfying because you know that they've gone through so much, and see them win it's just you can't write a better script than that. Next, we have another sports movie based off a true story, Miracle. And I watched this to commemorate the 40th year anniversary of the Miracle on Ice. I've watched that. By doing that, I missed the infamous David Ayers emergency backup goaling game. But I think that this was a good way to compensate. They showcased the lead up to the game and how the U.S. Olympic men's hockey team was organized, and how they were able to gather a group of misfit but talented college hockey players, some of whom made it to the NHL. But but by assembling this group of guys, they were not only able to grow as a group, but as a team, and they eventually got better from how they started, and through the tough coaching by Herb Brooks, not to someone from Hoosiers, and ultimately resulting in their penultimate gold medal victory and upset over the Soviet Union in the Miracle on Ice. And they do a very good job recreating the time. I applaud them for putting in the effort to make it look like it was made in 1980s. So for that, I give it a very good grade, and deservedly so on my top 100. Next, I will be unveiling a comedy. This is the End. Unlike the other movies on my list so far, this movie is a satire in how, end of the world movies are portrayed at like 2012 or The Day After Tomorrow. And this movie, what this movie does is it doesn't take itself too seriously. That's really all it comes down to. That I like how they all play themselves. They all satirize their selves, and it's really funny to say that. And they all have underlying issues in their own way. And I they do have some allegorical references to the end of times, as portrayed in the Bible, and they make references to that in the movie. And but overall, it's a very funny movie that I didn't expect to really delve into existential themes, but it actually did in a way. But overall, I think that it did its job in satisfying my interest for almost 2 hours. Next we have Patriots Day, true story of the events of the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. And like with Only the Brave, these true stories, this just hit close to home. And this movie also is based off a real life event that happened in 2013, and one that hits close to home, as a few years before the Boston Marathon bombing, my family and I were at the finish line where the bomb went off, where the bombs went off, and it's really humbling to to learn more about this event and how the tragic events that led up to it and after, and how everyone in the city of Boston and surrounding areas came together and persevered and were able to grow. And again, the acting, they do a great job. Like some Mark Wahlberg to J.K. Simmons, but overall, a respectful tribute to the people who tragically perished in the Boston Marathon bombing. And last but not least for today is The Usual Suspects. Now, this movie is an interesting crime drama where they're trying to, where the movie the detective is trying to find the suspect behind the shooting on a boat. It's basically the simplest terms I can get. But it begins with the direct detective interrogating. It isn't already obvious from his name because they weren't being very subtle, and that he's portrayed as this kind of the opposite of verbal, as he's very shy and not open to conversation. But in reality, I mean, it's can be up to one's interpretation as to what happens at the end. Because as they're just they're trying to find the this infamous Kaiser Soze, whom, spoiler alert, does end up being Verbal Kint, in a shocking turn of events. Although, like what I said, if you recognize the name, you should have seen it coming. But anyway, the I like what it does in it, how it tells the story of the events, and how Verbal Kint, who is telling the story, is deemed as an unreliable narrator. The detective listens to him so intently because he's so determined to solve the case and arrest Kaiser Sose. In the midst of all this happening, you had all these other men who were seen as the suspect or the usual suspects in the crime, who come from all different ways of life, and it's it's interesting in that way. I think that regarding the acting performances, people who stood out to me: Benicio del Toro, Kevin Pollak, and as controversial as he might be today, Kevin Spacey put in an absolutely terrific performance as Verbal Kint in this movie. And that, like I said, the twist is what really furthered my for this movie. But I also, again, take it with a grain of salt, and with hindsight being 2020, and the fact that the director Bryan Singer has also been in hot water recently, so kind of took it down my list. But still, an overall very good movie. So anyway, that's my list for today. Join me next time as I unveil numbers 70 to 61. Arrivederci.